All right. Yeah, everyone, welcome to my presentation about Svelte. It's a UI kit framework made in JavaScript. Well, first I will introduce myself. I am Thomas Karangenhorst, and I'm a developer here at Iconica. For about 2 years I work here now. I'm mostly a Flutter developer, but in my free time I like to spend my time discovering new technologies and also web technologies. And that's how I came about Svelte. Okay. Yeah, first the agenda. First, I'm going to tell a little bit about the history of the web and some of the techniques used, and then I will roll into how Svelte is relevant in this. Then I'm going to talk about some basics, reactivity in Svelte, props, templating, events, bindings, a little bit of life cycles in Svelte, state management, animations, advanced styling, component composition in Svelte, special elements, and the modules. So, from the beginning, JavaScript was made in 1995 by Ben Ike as like a first scripting language for the web to use in back then it was Netscape to make websites a little bit more dynamic. And later, in 1997, they first made ECMAScript, the first standard for JavaScript, to give it the same standards for everyone to use. Because of for example, take 2000 when Internet Explorer became popular, it got 90% market share, and it kind of went and did things on its own. We all know how that fragmented the web and everything you have to implement. Luckily, it's now dead from this year, so we don't have to deal with that anymore. A little bit later, jQuery came around, also an important step in web technology to make JavaScript a little bit easier to use, also to implement in different browsers. So mostly that it's not really that relevant anymore, but it has an important place. So then later in 2008, Google released Google Chrome built on top of Chromium with the V8 engine, and that really changed how JavaScript was used. From that point on, it could be Git compiled, instead of being in interpreted language. And about a year later, Ryan Dahl made Node.js with the V8 engine, and that way we could use JavaScript on the server side to make backends, or nowadays we can even pre-render JavaScript basically on server side. He later made Dino with some changes, also a runtime, but with some improvements like security and the way packages are handled. yeah, if you really want to know more about that, you can watch this video, 10 things I regret about Node.js. It's a really interesting video, but okay. And yeah, later, also this year, okay. Yeah, also later this year, ES5 came around, one of the first big major updates in JavaScript with things like stack mode, array functions, JSON objects, all that, and also Coffee script came around, and that was like one of the first languages, so to say, that could uh, transpile to JavaScript. So that's a really important part for later. And also later in 2010, Angular uh, came around, and that also changed how we could render components in the DOM. I'm going to talk little bit more about that later. But yeah, that really changed how we could declaratively change the DOM in the web. And well, 2015, a little bit later, E6 uh, was released, one of the biggest major updates to JavaScript with things like classes, async, asynchronous code, and things like arrow functions, map and set. So that was also a really big change to JavaScript, and also, like I said earlier, we could do more with vanilla JavaScript, so we don't need things like jQuery anymore. Uh, well, also this year TypeScript released, so to keep it simple, it is basically strongly typed JavaScript. Uh, that was also a major thing on the web because, well, most of the JavaScript software is basically built with TypeScript nowadays. And React also became popular, and that was also yeah, a really big framework that really changed the web with the virtual DOM, made it a lot easier to manipulate and change the DOM in a declarative, simple way. And also, well, modular bundles became a lot more of a thing. So we could basically bundle together all JavaScript, CSS, all that good stuff, and packages together and ship to the web because everything became so big and bloated and got really out of hand easily. Yeah, you got things like, well, maybe most of people Webpack, or Gulp, and later Feed in 2021. Uh, is, well, that's Feed is now becoming really popular. And well, the last major thing is WebAssembly in 2017, and that was a way to compile languages like C, C++, Rust, or Go, anything like that to the web, and you could even use it with JavaScript to run your applications in the web. And well, the rest is basically history, like things like, for example, we use Flutter. Later, Flutter became able to run in the web, all that sort of thing. So, but one major thing I want to talk about is, well, basically DOM manipulation. So, like I said earlier, JavaScript is used to mostly manipulate the DOM, and the DOM is basically this object model of well, tags in a tree. So you have your document with HTML, head, title, and everything underneath. And well, what basic JavaScript looks like, plain old JavaScript, you could really easily manipulate everything in the DOM. So you could, for example, say here, I could say like document create element. I could give it an ID, some inner HTML, and then I can append it to the body by saying append child to the body. Basic stuff, and you can get really big with that. Uh, it can be a little bit clunky for really big applications. Also, an option is like string based by, I don't know, concatenating all of your tags in like a string and then render it out. It's not really recommended. It gets really messy. Well, you can use it on smaller scales, like even Svelte uses this a little bit under the hood, and things like Git HTML does this sort of thing. But no, you can sometimes see this in old legacy code, but it's not recommended. Well, and we are coming back to jQuery now. Like I said, it became a little bit easier with these special functions. You can just say like a document ready, and then like uh, in this example, I grab a button and just say click event, and then I can, for example, hide the paragraph element. So it gets really simple, but also, well, back then it was really useful to use. But nowadays you don't really need it. Well, then you got the incremental DOM. This is what Angular uses under the hood to update the DOM. And what it basically does is it creates a set of instructions, and then like to create like parts of the DOM tree and then render them out. So like in this example, you can really just, for example, here add something to your DOM tree, delete, and all these well predefined functions, so to say. Yeah, it still needs a runtime to make it work. So that is like a bit of a thing, but it doesn't cost very much memory to do. But then you later on, and this is what React pioneers, and later also frameworks like Vue use. And that's the virtual DOM. And what the virtual DOM basically does is it creates a new virtual DOM tree in the memory, and then like basically compares the old DOM to the new DOM, and then renders it out. And so it's really easy to use actually, but it costs a lot more memory. And well, if you take React, for example, you can write your components like this with, well, in this example, it uses JSX. It's basically like an XML, of it looks like HTML, but it isn't really HTML. It's a sort of XML syntax. Well, you can also write your React components basically with JavaScript. So in this, you can create an element and give it some properties, some objects. And this is basically what React renders out with JSX. So it basically creates this and then stores it in memory and then compares them every time. Okay. But there's a little problem with this. Although the virtual DOM is very easy, it's basically overhead that you're creating. So let me clarify this. So let's go back a bit to 2013. React was in its very early stages, closing into a 1.0 release. And one of the former React team members, Pete Hunt, talked about React and the virtual DOM and how it's used. And he basically said like that the virtual DOM is really fast just because the normal DOM is slow. Oh, well, he basically went like, yeah, it just tends to drop frames and it's just not, yeah, not very good to do it manually. But but why is that not really true? Like, somebody know why it could be that the virtual DOM is not?
Well, it sounds like it's fast compared to the DOM. It doesn't mean the virtual DOM is fast, right?
Well, yeah, you kind of do. The DOM is very fast. The virtual DOM is fast, but you can't really, you always use the DOM API that JavaScript uses, so you can't really pass around that. You can't get past that. You always need to define those functions to render them out, basically. It's always in addition to what the real DOM is doing. And well, back then there were a lot more less efficient frameworks to go around. And what you're basically saying is basically an alternative that nobody does is like render my whole application in the main document. Like it's really weird actually. Well, he later clarified like you could, if you're smart about it, you could outperform or make something that outperforms React, but in to keep it short, but well, that doesn't really, that didn't really stuck with some people. So so to go in a little bit more detail, like the virtual DOM, is it slow? No, it's not slow. It's very fast, but it has certain caveats I would like to talk about. Like one of the caveats is the original promise of React was to you could re-render your entire app with every single state change without worrying about performance. And well, in the long term, that didn't really work out. Like, and the React team knows this. People who know React, they maybe know like component functions like component did mount, should component update, should component did update, all that sort of thing. Now, yeah, nowadays it's mostly React hooks with functions. So you have things like yeah, use effect, use reducer, use callback, use memo, uh, all that sort of thing, to basically give the developer the power to optimize their application. So to go in a little bit more detail, like take for example this simple React application before optimizing. Like what the virtual DOM basically does is every time it compares every single state change to what has happened, and it does from the very top to the bottom, or like from the component that gets changed, renders everything down. Like in this example, I could with every keystroke. Something even new. Ah, okay. Well, in this example, it should actually, whatever. Okay. Oh, yeah, it's this one. Yeah, what I want to show is basically in this example, you can really see every single keystroke that I do in here. Everything is rerendered, even this little child component. So yeah, and one of the simple things you can do is basically, well, in this example, really simple, you can move the state to different components, and then like, well, it doesn't re-render the child component every time. Well, really simple stuff. But to go in a little bit more detail and some different hooks, so to say. Well, in this example, you have, for example, you have this, well, still this, the console background. Well, you still have this little input food, like with the previous example, every keystroke, the child components get re-rendered. You can increment, well, and then it still re-renders. But well, let's take this example, and then we have a little bit more hooks like use memo and use callback. So what I'm using is a use callback hook to basically set a new in this a number, so it increments a number, and well, the most important part here is that it keeps track of this little number from the use state. Well, I also have this use memo hook to return a function still with the count, value, and well, basically saying like remember this value unless it changes, and then re-render my components. So then a little bit on here, so I can still, like with the previous example, this doesn't re-render my child. If I do this increment, well, it's a little bit of a delay made here with a for loop, but yeah, you can still increment, here. So yeah, there's all these special kind of hooks and things to yeah, give you the power to optimize your components. But why would you do that beforehand? Like, well, and one of the other things, well, and one of the other things is just DOM diffing is it ain't free. Like it costs a lot of memory and efficiency to render these props out every time. So to go in a little bit more detail, like I said, what Flutter DOM does is compares the old DOM to the new DOM. But what it basically does is every time something changes, it goes to everything. Like, is it diff change? Is it a class? Is it not a class? The paragraph component, is that changed? The list, is that changed? Well, and also like this, things like, for example, you want to render out a list. Well, in this example, you can just use plain old JavaScript to map them out. But if something changes here, everything gets re-rendered every time. So, and also if something maybe above it changes, gets re-rendered, unless you use like hooks. And that's also like really weird, actually. It's not efficient. So, well, it's actually important to remember, like, the virtual DOM isn't a feature, but it's certainly a means to an end. And well, in terms of performance, it's generally good enough, but basically what people wanted with Svelte is basically proof that there is a better way to do this than with the virtual DOM. So you may be asking also what's up with Svelte right now. Well, what Svelte basically is a declarative framework that turns your declarative code that you write into plain vanilla JavaScript at a build time. So it's basically comparable with a compiler. So, so if you wanna get in a little bit more detail. That's my mouse now. So to look at it a bit more detailed, like this is what basically Svelte compiles. So if you look a little bit at the internals, like you can see a little bit, like here this create fragment function. Well, it has a value, and here you can see like the h1. Well, this h1 gets gets put into an element, and then like Svelte can like see that it has that is coupled to in this case this HTML component with a name, so it just renders that out. And well, a little bit down the line, you can see like everything gets turned into like a class, a basic JavaScript class with some additional functionality. So this is basically what Svelte is. It's a compiler. So to go into the details. All right. A basic Svelte component is basically a script tag, your templating, and some styling. Well, the basics, you can just add values here, functions, everything. And the templating, well, you can just use about everything in here. So it's basically JavaScript. So in this case, you can, for example, say like to uppercase of really too fancy. You can even use dynamic attributes for everything, for all tags. So in this example, you can say like the SRC, you can just short it to SRC, and that Svelte knows what to do with it. But about the templating, I'll go in that in a little bit. You can also add like CSS directly to your component. So you can just use a style tag like most templates. It's even like scoped by default, so everything you write in your component is just scoped to that component and doesn't get mixed with everything else. Unless you give it a global, then it just gets global. Well, like all the frameworks, you can also import different nest components of Svelte components and nest them in your templating. Like in this example, nested components you can just use like this, or even shortened with here the backslash also works. Yeah, templating. Svelte has these special block templates you can use to like earlier you can put your variables in there, but also you have, for example, things like this with the HTML tag. So well, this one just renders HTML out. The only thing to note here is that it doesn't get sanitized, so you have to escape it for yourself. That's the only thing, but yeah, it can just, for in this example, it can just render HTML, but also I'll go in a little bit more detail later with the block, with the tags. Okay, reactivity. Well, one of the major things in Svelte you can do is the reactivity system. It's actually very easy to use. Like you only have to use the let keyword to like set a value, and it's reactive, just like that. No hooks, nothing else. You can even use like functions. For example, in this, you can get a button, you can give it an on click, and then it just updates this value and everything gets re-rendered. And then you can also use it further in your templates to give it some, give it a bit, make it a little bit more dynamic. You've also special declarations, like for example, this one. Does somebody know what this means? The little dollar sign on?
I think it's a shorthand to execute a function or something. Like if you access it, it will do the thing that's behind the equal sign.
Yeah, you're close, but well, this is basically a valid HTML. It's a labeled statement, and Svelte uses this a lot. Like what it basically does is basically every time, like in this example, the count gets updated, this one gets updated. So you can just make these dynamic variables that change every time. So in this case, you can do the count by 2 and you get a double value, and you can just reflect that. Like in the previous examples, you can just display it in your templates. But it doesn't, it isn't limited to just keep values, keep track of values. You can also give blocks, or use blocks in it. Like in this example, I can use an if statement to see if the value doesn't get higher than 10. You can even just execute different blocks of code in it. So it's very versatile in that regard. Props. Well, like in all the major frameworks, all your components have properties that they can use. You can pass values to different components. The only thing you have to do in Svelte is just give it an export. So if you say in this example, export that answer, and then you can just, right here, you can give it a prop, in this case of a number. You can even give like default values. So yeah, it's really easy to just pass things down to child components. You can even make it easy for yourself, like you can even spread your props. Like in this example, I have an object with a few variables like name, version. And if you do things like this, like with this component, you can just well, you have a lot of properties you have to give. You can just use the spread syntax of JavaScript to make it a little bit more easy to use and a little bit cleaner. That's also like one of the major things of Svelte. It tries to keep everything limited. You don't have to write a lot of boilerplate code and keep everything clean and small. Templating. Well, like you saw earlier, you have a pretty dynamic templating syntax to use in Svelte. So, for example, you can use these special blocks. For example, you can use the special if block to make simple if statements. You can also if else, just if, and then those else. You can even do like else if. It gets really dynamic and really easy. You also have like each block for loops, so you don't have to like use for each of map like you normally would. So like here we have an object. I can say for in this I have an array of cats with objects in them. I can even spread them, so I can only use the values that I want to use. You can even give it an optional index. Yeah. You can even use key to each block. So in this example, we have another list of objects with IDs and names. And like in here, you can just add like a key to it with braces. So in this example, I use the ID as the key. Because what sometimes happens is if you render things to the block and you manipulate your, in this example, your array, then Svelte will update it and then removes the last node in your DOM. So you can use the key to say to Svelte, like, this is the property I want to remove from the DOM, so it can easily keep track of everything. You can even use the await block to await promises in your templating. Like in this example, I can use the await if nothing is if there is no value, I can just put the tag here. If there is something, in this case a number, I can just say the number is number. You can add a catch block if something goes wrong. You can even shorten that a little bit if you have a promise that resolves immediately or can't fail. So you can just say await then in one line. So simple things like that. There's even a key block. This, if like the value changes here, this component gets reinitialized every time this value changes. Little bit later, you can see a little bit more detail when this is useful, but it can be useful if you want to update something every time a value changes. Well, like earlier, the HTML block, like I said, you have to escape it first. Because Svelte just renders it out, it doesn't do sanitizing for you. You even have a const block for in like each blocks or ifs. You can just add a constant to it. And the debug block to console log objects to the console. Events. Well, Svelte also has a really powerful event system to make it really easy to use events like you normally would in the DOM. Normally you would write special listeners for that, but in Svelte you have really a lot of built-in events. Like, for example, in this case, on mouse move, I can couple my function to that, and I can just say, in this example, the x is uh, uh, bound to client x, and you can just, if I over here just shows the coordinates of my mouse, but there's a lot of built-in ones. You can even use it inline if you want to. Svelte doesn't have any performance penalties on using it like this. Svelte has even has modifiers to change the behavior of your events. So, like in this example, I can add an on-click for just once. So this one only gets triggered once in your component. Well, a list of all the modifiers, like most people here probably know the event default. Things like passive, well, Svelte does this one mostly for you. Once, like I said, self, and there's a lot of these you can use. You can even create events for yourself. So you can just use the create event dispatcher to create events for your components. Like in this example, I create a dispatch with message and text hello. So I can just say, in this example, on message, the name of the dispatch, and I can just add my function to it, and then I can use the event to get the text and then render it out. You can even forward these events. So you can say, like in this example, I can add my function to this component, and then I can pass it around to the inner component, and then this component handles, like in the previous example, the dispatch. But event forwarding also works for DOM events, so the on-click, the basic things like that. Bindings. Svelte also adds a really easy system for binding values to like input tags, like one of the major things you will probably be doing. Like in this example, you can just use bind value to bind, in this case, the value of name to this input field. And it gets rendered out immediately right here. You can kind of do the same thing with, for example, numeric bindings for like numbers and ranges. Also, one of the nicer thing here is because everything is like a string in the DOM, normally you would have to cast it, but with Svelte you don't have to do it, so you can just bind a number to it and it just works. So that's one of the easier things. Checkboxes, bind checks, and click on Boolean. You can add a Boolean to it. Even like radio buttons, so you can add a group to it and a value, and then and even like checkboxes. So like in this example, I have an array, I can use each block, and then bind to the value to this input. So you can get really creative with this. Well, select multiple, and you can just add the multiple modifier to it. You can even create content editable bindings. So if you add content editable to it with a bind of, in this example, in HTML, you can edit, in this example, some HTML, so it gets really easy. You even have some special bindings, for example, for media bindings. So like in this example, I have a video tag. I can add the common ones to it, like on mouse move, on touch move, mouse down, mouse up. But you also have special bindings like current time, duration, or pause. Yeah, you can do a lot of modifications with this. Also, one special binding on every tag is dimension. So you can, for example, like here, you have a kind width, kind height, offset width, and offset height, and you can just bind it to values. So in this example, you can bind it to like two different values and just change how large your tag. Yeah. Oh, what is it?
Are you aware of the time? Because it's
Oh,
quarter past.
It's because we start 5 minutes later. I think we have to round it up because otherwise we don't have a short break.
Mm.
And we have a second session after this, so.
oké.
Rest of the time.
Eens even kijken. Yeah, I can do a little bit. Well, Svelte also has, like most major components, has life cycles. So you have like on mount, on destroy, before update and after update. And you also have a tick, so you can use that to await a micro test to wait for Svelte to update. Even kijken. Well, context API, well, it's really easy. Just like, for example, in React, you can set context and pass it down to the children. So you can give it a key, some value, and you can just grab it out of the context. Yeah, you even have wider stores like for better state management. Like for example, Wireable that you can subscribe to and then update the values. You can even add auto subscription with a dollar sign. Well, readable store is kind of the same.
You have to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no.
Nee. I'm gonna keep it at that. So that's what best is.
Yes, the next meetup you can talk about part 2 of this topic. So there's way more stuff, perhaps another 45 minutes of content. So it's very possible that in the next meetup you can talk again about the topics you didn't cover today. Thank you very much. Do you have
live.
All right, cool. Hi. I'm going to talk about modern Flutter. First disclaimer, I've been a little bit sick past few days, so it is not as clean and as completely filled with content as I wanted it to be. And it's definitely not as good as the presentation from my predecessor because, can't beat that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about modern Flutter, and I'm just going to show you more about what's in my presentation in a bit. But in short, I'm just gonna do a kind of retrospective on the experience I've had with Flutter in the past, and then also what I've encountered at a conference, both the good and the bad parts that I've seen there. And bad, not necessarily that there were any really bad experiences, but more as in I've seen some things that I really had questioned why they even attempted to do such a thing. In that, can we continue? Right. I am going to do the following. I am going to quickly explain Flutter. I see that the only one that has no experience with Flutter is in the room, but I want to consider the people online as well. And in that, I want to make sure that we get a basic understanding of what Flutter is. I also want to get over some experiences, some anecdotes from working here and from working and visiting that conference. And then I want to put some other things into like reality using by developing an app. And I kind of already developed the entire app, but I'm just going to walk through the code and show you some of the parts and why they are cool or why they are better than before, or maybe you think they're not better than before or not cool. And in that case, I invite you to ask questions and challenge me, because it's not just me talking here. I want to have full feedback on what you think, because in the end, I want to have a cool discussion about what's the current state of Flutter and the community projects around it. All right, now I'm going to continue to who am I? Most of you know me. I am Joey Burenkel. I work at Iconica for 1.5 years now, I think. Yeah. And so far I've grown to be a developer, a trainer, and a team lead, and a Dart and Flutter enthusiast. And I already was the last one for way before, but the other ones I've grown into. And I'm very happy with all the technologies we work at. And so far it's been my 3rd meetup here. I have done 2 meetups in the past. One was Solid Block, which was a by now ancient architecture pattern in Flutter. And the other one was in Conduit, which was it's a backend framework for written in Dart. As you can see, both Dart and Flutter technologies. So I'm just going to continue the trend and talk about Dart and Flutter some more. Well, a quick introduction to Flutter. Flutter is a client-side front-end framework in Dart. The reason I say client-side front-end is, and not say purely UI framework, because you're not doing just UI, you're doing basically from UI and back until you talk to native components or you communication with the backend. But to consider it purely UI is like thinking that you digitally are coloring in some lines and then you're done. I think that's only where the real work starts and ends. Well, it allows reactive UI experiences and cross-platform access to native API. And I wore a cool shirt right here, but it's in gold, so I have to wear a sweater over it. It says everything is a widget. It's not. It's most definitely not. It's about 75% of the framework is not a widget. It's different trees beneath it. And underneath, widgets are basically we as a developer talk to it, and they create a tree that is more, did you know, from, for example, JavaScript, DOM. But under the skin, it creates another element tree which maintains state and controls like what is new, what needs to be rebuilt. It's a very bridge version. It's way more to it. And then that talks to a render tree, which not everything that has a state actually renders. If you think of like if you have a box that has padding that has a number in it, but that number is being counted, the counting of that number does not have to be rendered, but the number itself has to be, so that has a different layer. I have a more, and I haven't opened the entire page, but I can go to it. The architectural overview, it's a great page if you want to dive deeper into Flutter, but I'll show you a little bit more, which is their homester. Here we go. As you can see, there's a widget tree that has several things that talks to an element tree, which takes in state, but also has render objects, talks to a render tree, which will eventually throw out pixels on the screen. It handles this incredibly efficient, and it's really smart about it, and I can really go in depth about everything that's going on beneath skin. We actually have a whole training about 3 days. Looking at this, 2-3 days where we talk about it, but I'm not going to talk much more. I want to talk a little bit about the in-depth part of it. And I have, so I can go back into this. I want to go over to some experiences what I've had. So now you know a little bit of Flutter. Flutter is a framework, and I've been visiting some to a conference, and I've both in a conference and at work or in online answers to problems. I've seen that a lot of people really like to invent the wheel 5 times, and that counts for really large things where it might actually be really, it might be proper, there might be a proper reason for it to do so, because of maybe some architectural requirements or some specific demands that you have, where you need to add a new, where you need to add something to a feature where it's too big of a change. But a lot of things you don't need to do 5 times. For example, a common issue that I've noticed is, on one side it's very minor things, but like taking in, if you create something that has creates like, can't think of the word, when the dependencies are bidirectional dependencies. When there are bidirectional dependencies that you have to clean up those dependencies after, for example, when you give a callback somewhere, that's more of an implicit bidirectional dependency, but cleaning up that callback is very important. And I think that there are a lot of tools, I'll talk about one of them, Flutter hooks, where you're actually more forced to think about them, or it actually does it for you, so you don't have to think about it at all. Whilst nowadays you see sometimes people create things without disposing them, and that leads to issues. And less issues is eventually more time to do fun stuff. The other side is that I've seen people, I saw a really great presentation about how they made a great, an animated widget that bounced back and forth. That was kind of like a gauge that showed how busy it was or how much interest there was. And whilst it was incredibly cool and it had to do a lot of things, they did everything at the lowest level of Flutter. And that made it that they spent several weeks and tens of thousands of lines of code for one single animated widget. And at that point, I'm thinking, maybe you shouldn't do it yourself and see what this framework can make and talk about it with the client, how you can narrow down the specifics to over there. That's what my second point, be clear about the consequences. What we see in work and in over there is that people tend to make go over and make actual like very interesting and specific ideas, and then but before they do that, they don't consider the consequences to go into the future, and then they're like, oh, I've spent 3 days on a splash screen. Very specific, but it could be anything.
Still mad about that.
On the one hand, you create amazing code and amazing features, and it's great, and the client will be very happy. But if you consider consequences, you can save a lot of people some stress. That you need to consider that coding is only part of the feature. It's only a small part of that feature. You need to think about the people that see it. You have designers that probably are going to worry about, that is just off, or that it's not exactly moving as I want it to be. Then you need to consider that you have to change it. If you wrote a lot of code that makes stuff difficult, then it's difficult to change, and that makes you lose your time. And this is a very thing, don't let yourself be limited in that regards. Don't say like, oh, I'm going to do everything the easy way. Everything is possible. Just make sure you're aware, tell everyone the consequences. So whenever someone says, I want to have this amazing thing, you're thinking, yes, that's possible. It should never be no. It should always be yes, that's possible. But it's going to take 3 weeks. And then they're going to be like, well, the client probably won't want 3 weeks. I've seen that in the conference as well. There's been several ideas or custom implementations of certain features that they go low level into the Flutter framework. Yes, it's possible. Yes, it's very cool, but it probably is not worth it. With that idea in mind, I want to. What's the time actually?
En het is 7:50.
So that's. I mean, I've been talking.
Technically, you still have half an hour, but there is a little bit of time to add to that. 9:30, 8:30.
8:30.
Yeah, 8:30, and normally we end with a small time discussion.
Yeah.
You can use that time.
All right. I'll take it slow. I'm going to make an app. Well, I've made an app. And I'm going to show you the things I've done and the things I've considered and how I think that in the future, if you work with Flutter, you should probably consider these elements as well. In this app, it's first a disclaimer. It's incredibly ugly. No designer has seen it, and I have not had the time to make it. I used the knowledge that I've gained in the last 2-3 months about these practices based on work experience and visiting conferences and looking up research online. And I made it in a day. Started this morning with that app. Basically because I got sick and stuff. But that's don't want to make excuses, but I'm gonna show you actually it's positive because I've made this in a day. There's quite a bit of logic that is not breaking. There probably are bugs in. Feel free to shoot at it and find in it, but there should be relatively safe for considering the low amount of time to develop. I wanted to make an infinite scrolling social media app. It needed to be interactive, so whenever you say something, it needs to immediately update, it needs to respond to things. You need to be able to comment on posts. It needed to be anonymous, as in you could jump in. The reason I said that, I didn't want to have a full authentication system in there. I just wanted to write a username and continue. And I wanted to require the user to think twice. Social media everything's everyone posts immediately, so I'm making sure that someone, when they press that the application says, "Are you sure?" And then if they still then are sure, then the application says, "Are you really sure?" That's another thing. The idea was essentially to implement some implicit animation in this as well, but considering the time I had to make it in combination with the time we've left, I've considered to leave it at it. There's 4 screens. There's a comment section. There's a home. The home is just
De
overlaid.
mogelijkheid is Action Stationsstraat.
Yeah. All right. There's a login and there's the post screen to create a post. I have not had the opportunity to make the create a post screen, but it doesn't show any new features other than the other 3 sections, because comments is basically also a post. But it's maybe twice the same thing. I have built in the API to create a post. But for now, it's limited. And the first thing I want to talk about is how those screens are going to be in my app. The way you used to make things or navigate between pages is using the navigator off, and then get the context, and then based on that context, we push a page, and we can give it a custom page and a route based on that. That means that in the middle of your widgets, you need to tell where we're going to navigate. We can do it with callbacks, but then we have a lot of navigational codes that we have throughout our application. They released Navigator 2.0, and I say it wasn't good. And with that, I mean, it was probably really good. It's a really good idea to add it into the system. It is terrible for developers, though. You write a lot of code boilerplate. You're limiting yourself a lot in terms of how you think about navigation. You have to write a lot of logic to even implement it well, to really use it. And then the Flutter team was like, okay, we can do it better. We will make our own package that uses the navigator to use with Go router. Then the Go router, and it's basically a package that allows you to navigate a lot easier. It has direct references to web. Flutter is now also a big player in the web app world, and that's why that's a lot of the resemblance is noticeable in Go router. Also, defining the structure of your app in terms of pages is a lot more clear. You can actually see how your app is layered, how nested routes work. The way I can show you it in practice. So I've got my app right here, and this is a model. I'm going to show you the routes from Dart is still empty. I still have it in here. I have a Go router, and that Go router has some basic information. It has an initial location, which is the start of your app. It's quite clear, but then there's a list of routes, and every route here, you can see these are the base level pages. So we have a splash screen that is the base of our app. So when we start our app, we go to our splash screen. Then we follow to posts. In this post, we can see that we have a basic overview screen of posts. But we also have 2 sub-routes with new and ID/comments. And this is probably very familiar if you've ever worked with any MVC framework in the past. Because you can easily push to new routes, and push to routes are basically redirecting the router going to a certain URL. And you can have placeholders. There's placeholders you can read, as you can see here. We read them by retrieving them from the state. Or you can even add, if you wanted to say you came from somewhere, like a reference URL, we could say reference, and we can use query parameters like this. And you can also fetch them from the state right here. Let me see. I need to change this block to a Block body. There you go. I can state I have access to a lot of parameters, one of which is the query parameters. So we can see, for example, this is an example where it came from. Allows you to create really dynamic apps and transfer state. You can even have a body, an extra when you route. What a lot of people would do is in the past, you would route to a page and then you provide an object or a reference to that object to a detail page, the entire reference. In this case, we are gonna not do that. It's probably a bad idea because in the web, you're not gonna pass a reference to an object to a page. Of this. What we can do is pass the ID and then fetch the same object from a similar store that we have in our app and just fetch it from there. That way you can get the same functionality as you expected from web or anywhere. And this is a very good way to also have reference state. So if you have a web app, you can reference the URL and pass it to anyone, and they can immediately look up the resource instead of that they have to be in a certain app state to get there. This is basically almost everything about a router. Last thing is that you can see I've made a redirect here. What I'm basically saying, if you're not on splash screen and you're currently a user, I'll get into this part later, is null. So we have a current user. Then we go to login. That's a generic thing. So even on web, if someone tries to go to a certain URL, just cancel it. Go to login. This is an asynchronous function, meaning we can do asynchronous lookups. This common mistake I've made is that I would occasionally preload my pages in this lookup. That's not the main part of this. There's better and other solutions to solve that. But in this case, you could, for example, if you've loaded a user, but you're not sure if that specific user has been loaded from memory or from a file, but it is required for the app, you could load it in here, and in that case, it's not really bad. But if you load it for a page, there's no, in GoRouter, if you push or go to a page, you can't await that. You can't wait for that to happen. So you can't give users feedback when it re-renders. So if you load a lot of data, it just freezes. So far, GoRouter. And it's a really quick overview. Anyone, any questions? Then I'll go back to my.
Yeah, one question is, this GoRouter is 100% capable for web as well, and desktop.
Yes.
Desktop, web, and mobile.
I can, I just there. Let's make it smaller. And I'll show you the package in dev and go router. There you go. It is Android, iOS, Linux, Mac, web, Windows, basically anything.
Yeah, I saw the common uses and patterns we use for the web as well.
Yeah.
So that's also another reason why not pass objects around.
Exactly. Yeah.
You wouldn't be URL capable anymore.
Exactly. So you want to stay URL capable, and it's another really important thing. I just read this message here with shell route. You can wrap routes in a shell so that anything beneath that shell immediately has access to like a parent widget. So a certain wrapper of overlaying widgets. So you can put it in a stack and then put widgets on top of it. So you have a default set of interactions across all subroutes. I've seen packages that make this even more declarative by, there's a GoWriter Plus package, but I think that it generates too much boilerplate and it forces you too much into a more strict environment, and that deviates from the basic Flutter philosophy. I'll just keep it open like this, otherwise I'll keep losing it. I'll go to the next one, and it's Riverpod. Riverpod is we all use it, been using it for a while. It's a state management, first place, and dependency injection. Those are the two main key usage. There's what I consider about this is that Riverpod is mainly for app and domain logic, this higher level logic, not necessarily for every single tiny thing in your app. If you are loading on a button, you probably shouldn't use Riverpod. If you're repeating a lot of tasks or creating a lot of providers, provider is a reference to an instance of something. It could be an instance of a future, so something JavaScript promises where you await for something. There's a state where you can update in their state, and in the past, we used to have a couple options. There's a lot more options. The list was endless. There's a list called state management. There's a state management on flutter.dev. There's a huge list of all the options that are there. Most of them are pretty outdated nowadays. Internally, we're working with Riverpod. And right now, one of the major features is compile time checks. The fact that you at compile time know what you're going to get and if it works is really important. Also, the fact that you can depend. Let's say you have something that depends on a string and something else that depends on a string. Those are two different strings and are provided by two different methods, but you still need to depend on them on when they are calculated. This works still. You can still depend on two of the same type. And it's a really big pro on that part. On top of that, the boilerplate is relatively minimal. There's very little boilerplate. The tooling around it is incredibly easy to set up. And even with the new Riverpod 2.0, this was a big talk in Oslo about it, but the big thing about there is that they're changing they're going to even less boilerplate by using code generation, because Dart is more moving to a code generation base. Because in Flutter, it's impossible to do any form of reflection or mirror system. One sec. There we go. It's entire screen. There we go. All right. Got the presentation. I'm just gonna sit and show you some Riverpod. So a common thing I see, and I'm just gonna show the first the basis of the app. I've created 3 models. There's a post, a reaction, and a user. User is the login. I wanted to actually reference and show the users in the app, linking them to posts, but limited time made me not be able to do that yet. Probably like a couple hours and I will have that. And that's more it's more like a statement on how easy it is to manage resources and link them with the package that we have, that is my capabilities. So I have two repositories, one for a post, which just uses a faker to generate some data, allows us to paginate that data, and we'll get an infinite list of elements, which has a provider. A simple provider is basically, it returns whenever I read this variable, it's a global. Whenever I read it, I get it back. I get the value that I returned. Which I do in my post service. And what I do in my post service is I have a future, which is a global function. Probably better if I would make it private, but just quickly, now it's safe. But it allows me to, I have a function that gets posts. It's a very limited function. It gets a post, I get the user model, because that's the two dependencies that I need to get a post. Only for a certain user, you can imagine that your content is aligned with your likings and, of course, what you've commented on. You want to see your own comments and see your own posts, even though it's not yet possible. But here I watch the user service provider. So whenever, this means that whenever the user service updates, whenever there's a new state change in the user service, I'm not sure what this is right here at this point. I'll get to that later. But whenever that updates, it can be something that loads or something that has an internal state that updates or something that just emits change. Whenever that happens, this entire provider will get a new update, and everything that depends on it will also be updated as long as it watches it and not reads it. I had an issue earlier where I need to go to this one, where this, if I make this a watch, it will actually fully restart the app because there was a new router all of a sudden. So there are some caveats. But it would fully go back to the splash screen and load the entire app again, but then go to the right screen where I wanted to. So maybe an unintended feature, but it's probably something that you need to take account of. So whenever anywhere within the reference, so if you this reference that is given when creating a provider, if you watch that reference, then anything that you watch will immediately cause the entire underlying provider to rebuild. This will give you can see watching a future. And then right here, I've got, this is about the most boilerplate you get from Riverbot. I've got a state notifier that has an async value that has a list that has of post models. Quite a lot. In the end, it's basically saying, I'm getting a list of post models somewhere in the future. Don't know when. And I want the internal state to be updated. I want it to be able to update, but I have to somehow depend on it because my service also needs to be updated from within the app, but also by getting data from outside. It's common practice is to use an async value in this case. As you can see, I have a variable here that is the current page. You'd say, isn't that part of the state? Yes and no, it's more of a helper of the state. And whenever the state completely resets, I don't need this current page anyway. So this current page resets whenever anything I watch updates. But in this case, it's bad. There's nothing wrong with that. I have a simple function that gets the next. So if no users will get the posts, and then I update. As you can see, I don't add to my state. I don't select my state and add to a list. The important part is that everything in Riverbot is immutable. Don't want to touch, don't want to change anything within your objects because nothing is going to get notified. Nothing is going to be dependent on it. Also makes a challenge whenever you post comments, because then you get this long function to update your state. That means that I have to look over all the posts. Whenever there's a post that I already know, I put it back in the list, but that post in the exact spot, I need to update a post and create a whole new post with a new set of comments where I add my current reaction to the list of reactions. Normally, I also update the repository in here, but that's, so you update foreign and local. But in this case, I've chosen for a completely local in-memory set, mimicking the functionality. If I run this, let's see if I can. Phone is locked. Flutter run. See the current state of the app. I don't remember if I'm logged in right now. That's not a feature I needed. And so I have to log in. But logging in is as easy as writing my username down, because I chose to be anonymous. Not because of time limits or anything, just because I wanted to be anonymous, of course. Oh yeah, good point. Thank you. I can grade font, as you can see. All right, I can log in.
You're clearly not this guy.
I was like, how can I make this as bad as long as possible? And then this just came up. As you can see, it loads. I've added, it's scrolling infinitely. And the way I do that, I will show that in the next part where I look at some hooks and how I do state management within the UI. As you can see, I also try to load the images before they get, so there's as little of a gray screen as possible. And it infinitely loads. I can pick anyone I want. I can, here there's one comment, I can write a great hello, how are you? Almost should send hello world. I can send, it's, as you can see, I've made the app very sure it's forever. I know, it's your choice. Yes. Okay, send it. Cool. How can I send it? It updated the state internally. As you can see, I have also now 2 comments without having to re-render the UI or do anything functionally. If I take a look at the code that specifically does this, is on the comment screen. The only thing I do, and the only thing seems like a lot, is I add a reaction model with the current user. And this is all I know. And I reference the notifier, that's the one that manages the state. And I say, hey, place this comment with this post and this reaction model. And other than that, I have to do nothing. I'm completely free to do whatever. My entire app listens to it, updates as it should. Which I think I've managed to add the most things, reference the most things about Riverpod in this case. Just an overview, because limited time. I'm 14 minutes in again, meaning that I have about 15 left, but I want to have room for discussion, so I'll probably go a little bit faster. Is Riverpod a bit clear?
What's the difference between watch and read?
Read only fetches the current state. It fetches the current state without ever listening to an update. So it's just, hey, what's your current state? I get it back. If you go to, if you do a watch, then it will both subscribe the current instance you're in, either a provider or a widget. It's a specific widget, and that I didn't show. It's probably smart to show. Here I made a comment form, which is a hook consumer widget. The important part here is consumer widget, the part I'll get to. That means that there's a widget ref, a reference, same reference as you get when you create a provider. It's same but different. It's 2 different instances, but same basic, same abstract class that's beneath it. And it subscribes that widget. In this case, if I would do watch in a rebuild. It's also why here.
So you actually said consumer widget reacts upon listen events when something changes.
Yeah. So basically, the entire idea of change notifier, you have to do everything normally. You have to notify listeners, where you have to basically write all the logic yourself whenever you update state, and you really you really think about your immutability, so that everything is immutable, and you only update as it's intended. Then basically, there's not much that can go wrong.
So actually, when you say 918, left watch,
Yeah.
if something happens on the post service provider, then this would trigger a set state and you would rebuild this widget.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the way I added, because this reference watch, what it would give me is an async value of a list of a post model. But considering that I'm in a nested state, I can probably guarantee that I have data, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to get here. So I can get it. And what I did is I added a simple extension to async value list post model to increase the state, like the usability of the state, instead of having to write custom methods every time you or write long pieces of logic whenever you go to not again. One more. Yes. Very secure. You get. I just added a get by ID extension to make logic a lot more compact. And one more. Question?
You use the hook consumer.
Yes.
The hook. Let's forget about the hook part.
Yeah.
What is the point of having a stateful consumer if you don't need it, right?
All right, so two things. If you just talk about consumer widgets, there is a difference between app logic and UI logic, and different training, but also have a whole in-depth, I can really go far in that. UI state and app state are very different things, and I believe that you would use a consumer, so if you don't use hooks, a consumer stateful widget is for when you do UI logic, whenever you manage, you press a function that does something asynchronously, but you need to lock your UI, or you need to show a certain pop-up that you need to manage state. You need to manage state between forms, or whenever you select something. That's current UI that doesn't reflect the actual app or the domain yet. So in that case, I advocate for a stateful widget. Then there is also specific cases of animation or listening to lifecycle events. In that case, stateful widgets are also the primary answer to that problem squirrel.
But hooks defeat the pressure. Is that point right?
Almost perfect. There is still a stateful hook consumer widget.
Yeah,
It exists.
I don't see use case for that one specific.
I think that if you do it well, you don't need it. But I'll talk about it a bit. I'll go to the I have 2 more slides left, so I should go quickly. Flutter hooks, it's again about state management. Once again, questions are ahead of my content. State management is about, this is UI state. This Flutter hooks is made, for example, whenever you need to scroll, you need to listen to the scroll, my infinite scrolling needs to do that. I can't do that with Riverbot. If I'm gonna do that I can do that with the Riverbot. I'm gonna make my life incredibly difficult if I'm gonna do that with Riverbot. I'm gonna make, it's gonna be requiring a lot more boilerplate code and a lot more thinking about the architecture to even use it. I'd probably be abusing Riverbot in that case. And that, especially for that case, hooks is incredibly useful. You can use some state, use I'm just thinking, use a controller, or you can register callbacks or load something at one time. Think about a form. How many of you have made a stateful widget simply to define just a form key that you can listen to? then you don't need that form key. You can actually use that with hooks. You can just load in that form key. You don't need it anymore. Riverpod has made a specific integration for hooks. So there's the hooks Riverpod package, which doesn't allow hooks immediately, but it allows integration with hooks. You still need to add the hooks package. Actually, a good idea to show you the packages I used. Oh, it's wrong list. I'll show it like this. I haven't updated it, just did Flutter create and just use the CLI to add packages. First time I'm looking at it as well. I used hooks Riverpod to enable hooks with Riverpod, and I used Flutter hooks and Go Router. Those are the main packages I used. I used Google Fonts for my incredibly ugly fonts, and I used Faker to generate some fake data. That's everything I used in the app. There's nothing more. There's no need for many more packages. A lot of my issues are solved by these. There's obviously some specific use cases I would get packages for. But whenever I start a project, I'll get these 3 first before even running the app. I just get them, have them ready to use, because my efficiency gets so much better whenever I have them. Going back to my slides and it's what I say there, it's an alternative to creating your own stateful widgets, but it's not a perfect replacement. It's a near perfect replacement, but it's not perfect. Yeah, a very specific use case is animations, and definitely writing your own implicit animation. You could create your own hook, that's true. And then you can subscribe to your lifecycle widgets. But sometimes that's very specific and you get to very specific code, but then you come back to, should you invent it yourself and should you go for the specifics? It's always like, but in general, if you see yourself writing a stateful widget, I think you need to ask yourself twice to consider that maybe you shouldn't and there's a better option. I'm not saying that stateful widgets are bad, and if you want to make a package or make something so it's mainly focused on making end user apps, not packages. Because packages, obviously, you don't want to force the developer into a certain package without like what it can limit the use of the. An example, I'm going to go to the posts page, which has just my home page here. Not renamed the file yet. As you can see, I've got at the top, it's a simple screen which has some callbacks and a ref watch. I watch posts. I look at posts, so see how many I have. And then at the end, I have a post when. I've not discussed this about Riverpod, but you can simply return a .when functionality to add a couple of callbacks for each certain case, and you can handle the error loading and when there's data functionality directly in the app through functions without too much hassle. So you have a very short section. There's in this case, I have a post display, which references this display, which has a lot more in its build function. A return, normally the build function is return. It's the first statement you see in the build function. In this case, I have about, let's see, so from line 89 till 117, so about 28 lines of code that are in the build function. This might feel weird. Normally you're used to having methods on your class. In this case, it doesn't need to be that. I have a method here. I could probably close it, and then it's a lot more clean. As you can see, the way I've written it in Dart, you can nest functions. You can define a function in a function in a function in a function. Everything is first class, so you can reference it later. So if I go through the logic that happens here, first I get a controller. And instead of like defining a controller and having a stateful class, I just use a controller. I want to keep the page, or I want to keep the current page in memory. That's a flag you can this default through. I think just trying something, so maybe it's not. But then we have is loading. I just use a state. It's false. This results in a state in a value notifier. A value notifier meaning that this subscribes the entire widget. So whenever I use update the value of is loading. So you can't just do if is loading, it's if is loading dot value. Then it will update this entire widget. So everything that where you define it. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because you could also define the higher level. If you define the higher level, everything will be built. Don't write a really long widgets, really split up your widgets to have a logic. In this case, I couldn't get it any lower because it is useful for the page builder. The page builder needs to go further, and at some point there's no longer data, so I need to say we're loading. Don't do anything else. Don't call 5 times after this. What I then do is I use an effect where I add some listeners, and then whenever we dispose, so what this does is just subscribes an effect, and then this function is called whenever it disposes, whenever it ends, whenever the widget gets disposed, whenever this value changes. The reason I put posts here is because if this value changes, so if we are listening to the posts that we're providing, if that value changes, there is a chance that whatever I'm looking up, whatever I'm comparing, probably isn't valid anymore. So I probably should reset my listeners. And in this case, I'll show you what happens on page update. I just set the loading value to true. I watch it. I hit the current page, hit the next page. I pre-cache images. That's very, it's a common function in Flutter. It's what I do here is basically I look up at what the next thing is. I pre-cache it. I make sure that it's ready to go whenever I want to, so I can just scroll continuously without ever seeing a gray screen because of an image that's not loading. And I just read the notifier and get next whenever I'm too close to the end. And I set the loading value back to false. So, and this is what the infinite scrolling effect provides. So just getting the next, and because that post service provider has that internal page, it can just keep reloading. Let's say I switch users, so let's say I log out and log back in, it will reset the entire state of.
You could use infinite scrolling with a generator as well, correct? With the yield syntax?
Yeah, that's also an option.
That would be the most simple option. So each time you fetch the new page, you use the generator to yield some.
Yeah, you can make it this a generated section. That probably works as well.
Generates and the stream, and then you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed is that mostly Flutter, the people are moving away from streams, because streams generally have a lot of issues with managing the open sinks, and there's a lot of chances for both for memory leaks. There's a high chance for it, and you see that streams often get or either abused or not entirely worked around correctly. They're very powerful, and if used well, then they solve a lot of issues. But in this case, with because the useful part, I think here is that I can watch it whenever. So whenever I do get next, all across my app, I get updated immediately, because it also notifies me. Also, I could do that with a listener. But once again, if you use a stream, I'm not sure. Is there a use stream? Probably is. Use stream? Yeah. So I can get a stream and then I can load the data as well. So there's also the option for that, because that's also a common issue that I've noticed, is that people do stream.listen and then provide a listener. There's no stream.unsubscribe or remove listener. Doesn't exist, because the listen actually returns a subscription object, and almost all other listen functions, like the change notifier, have an add listener, remove listener functionality. So it's counterintuitive, the streams that they listen. So I'm glad Ustream is there. I have not looked at that yet. I think that there's a really short introduction to hooks. Still any questions so far?
I have a question. You say there was one specific use case?
Yes. Yes, the specific.
Not good enough.
Yeah.
But I dare to say they are better.
You think it's better to?
Not for those implicit animations.
All right. Okay.
But due to the use memoized.
No, definitely.
Because you can use it to cache data over multiple instances of a stateful widget.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
It's
not possible with the regular stateful widget. You have to just a high level.
yeah. You need to define a final or const global key at the top. Yeah.
But I think the pros of using of hooks and mostly the memoized outweigh the fact that some explicit applications cannot be created with a hook consumer.
Yes, and
Right?
yeah, I agree. Yeah, I completely agree that if you can use hooks or you can use Rivercode or either of the two, and you don't, you need to really have a good reason to not be able to.
So what you're actually saying is by default use hooks and Rivercode, except for.
Yeah,
So
if you're committed to using those two packages, that is, if you're completely committed to a different set of packages, they are. This is currently the main stream of packages that is used. But if you're using these two and you're then diverging from their use and use something yourself, you're building it yourself. Going back to not invented here, that you want to do it yourself. Probably asks.
Memoized actually creates a key, and the next time it returns the key it created earlier.
Exactly. Yeah, it creates a cache. Yeah. Memoize creates a cache.
Use memoized.
Yeah, it's basically from React use memo.
Yeah, it's a factory.
Yeah, and they probably wanted to say use memorized, and then. But it's I'm not sure why it's called that, but it's.
But it is inspired by React hooks. And we also have use state and the use effect and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's completely inspired by React hooks.
It makes your status widgets use state.
Yeah, and really it really helps. Yeah.
So we can agree that if we ever see stateful hook consumer somewhere in our code, there needs to be a reason.
Yeah, exactly. I want to, if I ever see a pull request with a stateful hook consumer widget, then I want to either see explicit comments above the widget, I'm using this because X, or I want to see it in the, and if you go back in code, you probably find one of mine earlier without a proper reason. So I'm not saying that this is a death sentence worthy, but it should be, there should be a comment why you use it. And I hope that with this talk, I hope that to make clear to everyone that think about, yeah, not, well, for 99.9% of the cases, they are necessary. Yeah. I never say,
I'm really curious.
so the thing is, the one example where I didn't where I think that it would be useful is an example where I eventually got rid of it. Because I split it up. Because I needed to use the consumer part from Riverbot and some hooks, but I also needed to do implicit animations. And what I did is I extracted, made just a stateful widget, not a hook consumer stateful widget or a stateful consumer widget. I just separated that and made that pure basic Flutter knowledge. The package for the bell that I made first was a hook, stateful hook consumer widget, and then I had to make it a package. And I was like, I'm not going to add Riverbot and all those things. And I also had to think about extracting it. And I was like, yeah, but if I extract it as a widget, so if you do good separation of concerns for your widgets, you probably don't need it. You can just go to you can use a stateful widget and completely extract the part that is required.
I still can't really imagine why some animation wouldn't fit in
Because you need to. All right. Do you know how to do the did update widgets and how to listen to that? Probably the use effect with the key could probably do that, but then you need to redrive the animation. Probably is possible. There's specific listeners or settings where you actually going into life cycle, but then you can make your own hook because hooks can access all those life cycles as well. So if there is a case, actually I've found a really good case. I'm thinking about it. I'm really digging through my mind here. The one case where I had it was I was using the Flick video, and Flick, the video controller, actually has there's a package and extension on hooks that allows you to use the video controller. But Flick doesn't have a hook extension. So either you need to make your own custom hook, or you need to accept that you need to go to stateful in that case. And in that case, there's actually a proper reason to extract, mainly limiting due to other packages. That's probably the. So.
The video player
hasn't fully finished.
There's no hook for it.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Are you able to add your own hooks as well? Because React all has possibilities.
Yeah, you can just use your own hook. You can there's use keywords. I've not made one myself yet.
That would be interesting to have a session about Flutter hooks, how they are used, which ones there are, how you create custom ones as well.
Yeah, the idea of this talk was mainly to get an overview, to get some discussion going, to get a feel of how things work, especially with people online, people here that haven't had the interaction with Flutter, being able to see the different aspects and where it currently is as a framework. I think that was the main goal. And then I really see, also based on what I've learned from earlier occasions, that any of these things that we've went into, GoRouter has a lot of more advanced features under the skin. Same with a Riverbot. Riverbot, you can really go in deep. Also with the new code generation, there's a whole lot to be talked about there. And then there's Hooks, of course, which has a lot.
We have GoRouter, Riverbot, and Hooks. And they all could be sections by themselves. But these are all preferred packages we have to use in creating our apps.
Exactly, yeah. It's all right.
Yeah,
not getting along with it.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
Let's see. Yeah. I have a final slide with overview. I think this is what I wanted to say is that the modern state of Flutter, it's currently still evolving, but it's evolving in a more straight direction instead of shooting everywhere. And that is probably where I'm gonna end for now, because there's much more to be said, but not much more to be said within the time I have. So
It was a nice overview. Thank you very much.